There we go. Okay, incentives. First, who here before today had heard about Gridcoin? A couple people. Okay. What about Boink, which before today was mentioned like 3 or 4 times today? What about SETI at home? Majority of people. Okay, and I assume you all crunched, you worked on SETI at home, you did those work units, you were involved with the project in some way or another? Yeah. Okay, so it was funded into Commons. There was a speaker, Kathy Mulligan. She mentioned that she thinks the space that we're working in right now is not working on a cryptocurrency level. We're not talking about currencies enough. We're doing tokenomics. And I think she is definitely onto something. The technology we're working on is basically economic networks. We're building our own nations with their own economic substrate. And it's built on open infrastructure. So we are the ones who can decide what we incentivize with the currencies we create, where we inject value, and how we inject value. So when we're working with COD, I think it's important to realize that everyone has a computer, and we can just inject currency into the system in which we all operate by giving it to people who contribute to distributed computing. So I've got 7 brief lessons here that I've learned over the years. I'm from Gridcoin. It's a coin that launched in 2013. We've incentivized Boink since then. Boink stands for the Berkeley Open Infrastructure for Network Computing. It's been running since 2002, 2003-ish, and as we all know, SETI at home is 1999-ish. So we have been doing this for quite a while, and basically what Gridcoin does is mint a currency and distribute it to people who contribute to these Boink projects. And Boink still runs. There's 30 some odd projects running things from COVID vaccines to asteroid identification and mathematics, a bunch of whole different projects around the world. So when we think about incentivization, we have to think about the fact that when we incentivize something, we're going to get more of what we pay for and less of everything else. It's not just what we pay for. We're sacrificing something else. If I paid you to go get me a bottle of water right now, you would get out of your chair, so I'm incentivizing you both to get the bottle of water and to leave an empty chair. So when we incentivize people for distributed computing, how is that affecting the rest of the economic network? If we're only distributing currency that we're minting to distributed computing, what aren't we distributing currency to? What else could we be distributing currency to? Could we be using currency emissions to incentivize impactful science? Could we be using it to secure a blockchain? Anything like that. So it's important to keep in mind that COD is only one aspect of these economic networks we're building. A second lesson over these years, incentivization does not need to be monetary. So the way that Gridcoin distributes its currency is we choose a subset of these Boink projects. So there's like 30 to 40 Boink projects. We choose about 20 of them to distribute our currency to. The way we choose them is through a network-wide vote, and we're a very, very large network. We have 5,000 staking nodes. We have probably 20,000 distributed contributors, computing contributors, and Boink itself has 200,000 hosts or more, so there's a lot of potential there. So we ask all these people to have a conversation about what is good science, essentially. So it's a very weird conversation to have, but in this network, we have scientists themselves, we have just regular people, we have people who are Web3 enthusiasts, and all array of background. So we end up creating a system where we're determining impactful science, or what we would call impactful science, without giving anyone money. They're not being paid to run an IE, which has been talked about a lot this week and is a very cool idea. But they're still getting to the same outcome. We don't need to pay them to do that. We ask them to determine what is valuable to them, and by doing that, they choose things that will add value to the network rather than detract value from the network. So they're not going to choose something that's trying to hack email passwords. They're going to choose something that's trying to cure cancer. That's the hope, at least, and it's worked so far. So, again, incentives don't need to be directly monetary. All right, number 3, like I said, Boink has 200,000 hosts. Gridcoin itself has 20,000 people contributing to the network. And all these other distributed computing projects, once they get going, people are going to want to contribute computation cycles to impactful research or any type of computation project, particularly if they're getting paid. So computer data has the potential to be kind of one of the next onboarding ramps to crypto, Web3, whatever you want to call it, even to science. Everyone here, from what I could tell, has done study at home, and study at home probably played a major role in what you're doing now. So we need to think about maybe UX and UI and how we can build these systems to help these new people come in to a large open community of distributed computing, choose what they want to research or what they want to contribute to, and then just seamlessly integrate into this new economic reality where we have dozens of open economic networks working in parallel to determine what we as a society think is valuable at any given moment in time. Again, COD has the potential to bring 1 million people into the network fairly seamlessly. Lesson number 4, you get to define the values of your network with the incentives. So if Gridcoin, for example, only distributed currency to projects working on cancer marker research or something like that, that would be what we decide is valuable. That's the value of the network. If we distribute currency to both cancer marker research and math projects, finding large prime numbers, we determine those things are valuable. When you add everything that we're distributing currency to, you get the set of what the network thinks is valuable. It's a value set. You can distribute currency to essentially anything you want if you can figure out how the mechanism would work. There are easy ways to measure it. Distributed computing has challenges, but it's one of the easier ones because you can measure flops, cycles. You can distribute points that way. But you could reward the Olympics if you wanted. We could distribute currency to every gold medal winner in the Olympics from 1980 and on. And that would be part of our value set. It would be a very weird value set because cancer marker research, prime numbers, and Olympic sports. But it is anything you want to do. What you incentivize, where you distribute the currency, defines the values of the larger economic network in which you're working. So when we defined these incentive mechanisms for these projects that were just starting to get going, I think it's important that we sit down and write down what our value sets are, what we think is valuable as a network. Lesson number 5, make things dynamic. So we have in a very envelope mathy sort of formula for how much computation power each project Gridcoin incentivizes. It's basically 1 over n plus x. N is the number of projects in the network. So if you have 10 Gridcoin to distribute to distributed computing projects, and you distribute 10 GRC a day, which is currency, each project would get, if you have 10 flops to distribute to a computing project, and you have 10 projects, each project would essentially get 1 flop. That's a very basic way to think about it. And then the plus X is anything else we want to add to it. So we can change that. We can make some projects worth more, worth less, try to get more people to do that work, and get fewer people to do a different project. We can make more people want to become Olympic athletes if we add that to our value set. Or when you bring in non-monetary incentives, you might be able to do something like what COVID-19 did when it first started going around. And we had this smoothing curve where we try to get people to distribute computation cycles to all these different projects, but all of a sudden there is this non-monetary incentive to contribute to projects that are trying to map the spike protein and otherwise analyze COVID-19 so we can develop a vaccine. And everyone, for a very brief time, stopped worrying about money and started working on the COVID-19 projects. They went very well. They discovered they mapped the protein very quickly, and we are where we are now. So there's that X factor that can manipulate where the currency is distributed, and then there's the aspect of it that's non-monetary, where if you can make people think that another aspect of the distribution or of the system is more valuable than another, they'll go do that thing, regardless of whether or not they're getting paid. So that's make things dynamic. And number 6 is a fun one, make things free by default. What the hell does that mean? So when you're distributing these currencies, there are specific projects that seem to be fundamental to advancing society, scientific projects mostly. So if we are developing systems that are still pay to store and still pay to compute, how is that any different than the system we currently live in? They should be able to store these data sets that build everything after it basically for free. We should be able to compute on them for free. And it's not free because nothing is free. It's essentially subsidized by the economic network that we've created. So we're generating currency and we're distributing it to people who contribute to these specific tasks. Now, if you're working on a project that is going to be very profitable, that's a very translatable project or otherwise profitable, you should probably pay for compute, but it should be free by default. Any researcher, anyone who's building a foundational layer to society or the way economies work should probably not have to pay for it. They should just get access. I would love to see how that gets built, but I do think it's very possible. So number 7 here, when you do all these things, when you have an economic network that lets people decide what's valuable, what the value set of that economy is, and you make access to these resources essentially free, supported by the underlying economic layer, the central bank, if you will, that's minting the currency, you can develop an economy that's based on science. So if the science research is the value set, the scientific outcomes are what is injecting value into the system. If you have a ledger of scientific outcomes that are deemed valuable, if you store valuable data, that is what this makes people want to interact with that data, with that ledger. People will want to use the currency to interact with the data because they have to pay transaction fees at the root of the technology. So you're injecting value right into the ledger by just making people do science. So that is pretty much all I've got for you. It's a very quick talk. I want to go back to one lesson, though, and that's how important this field, computer over data, is in terms of adoption. It's bringing people in from almost every field to do one thing, which is compute, which basically runs the world already and is probably going to become much more important over the next 20 years. You get people who are working on economics, you get people who are working on software development, you get people who are working on every layer of the stack at the same time, in the same room, talking to one another and trying to figure all this stuff out. It's very important to be open to these perspectives. And in Gridcoin alone, for example, we are a very old coin that really did not start with any pre-mine. There was no ICO. There was no money. And we've survived for almost 10 years at this point solely because people want to do this. They are very interested in making this work. They want science to be the base of economy. They don't want debt to be the base of economy. It doesn't make sense. We want to make the world a better place, and if in order to make money, I have to make the world a better place, that's awesome. That would be so great. Imagine every rich person right now, today, who instead of having to extract value from the system in order to become rich, had to produce scientific outcomes that made the standard of living for everyone around them better in order to get rich. They can still be as rich as they want, but the way they got there was to make everyone else's life better, to make more medicine, to make more faster cars or better, more efficient cars, anything like that. That would be a world that I think a lot of people want to live in, and Gridcoin is an example of why I believe that, because it just still exists. There's no reason this thing should exist anymore. It was a very bad set of code. It had very interesting and, let's say, poorly designed economic systems. And we're going to hear from Levy in a second, who has gone from Gridcoin to just contributing to Gridcoin to developing a very interesting model for how to incentivize distributed computing across many different platforms. Our developer is just a guy with a lot of time who's really, really smart. And he has a very serious job outside of Gridcoin. Our community just has families who they just want to see this work. No one's paying them. It's insane. So, point being, an economy based on science is something that will bring thousands of people in here to build because it's something worth building, not because they're getting paid for it. And it's very inspiring to see all these projects that have been presenting today, and there's been almost no talk of tokens. There's no pay model. We're going to build this thing that's going to fix this problem. And we have this solution. It's very nice to see. So I hope that's the way the space keeps going. And with that, I don't know, anyone got any questions? There's not much to ask about, but all right. Levy's coming up.